Mm, no. Mm, mm, no. This meeting is being live streamed. Hmm. That's Gyro Jamyang Pao. Oh, I should let someone in. Admit Rami. Welcome to wake up and have a little less conversation and a little more action.
Thank you, Hyro Presley.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hmm.
How we all doing this morning?
Uh, I'm alive.
Yes, I think everyone who'll be there will have that in common. It seems to be to varying degrees, though.
So,
What are we going to do with our lives?
yes.
I propose this morning we speak of systems of exchange, perhaps specifically within the realm of complementary currency, but we don't have to limit ourselves to that.
System of exchange.
Yes.
Those involve currency.
Can involve currency, or it could be a system of ledger. When I was a child, at a place right next to the apartment complex that I was growing up in called Magic Mart. And at Magic Mart, there were these bins of candies. And the fellow who ran Magic Mart had a book, it was a ledger. And you could buy a candy, like a butterscotch candy, which cost 1 penny, okay, via his ledger, which means he'd say, I'd like that candy, and but I don't have any money. So he would take out, he had the book right there next to his register. And so he'd write down your name, and then he'd put in like 1 cent. So a kid could walk in the store and get a candy or maybe a few candies, and your name would be recorded and the debt would be recorded. And maybe I guess the parents would go in and pay off the debt. But that was just his policy. It's the way he did it. And I imagine at some point people settled debts. And I know I've seen movies all the times where, not all the times, but I recall seeing movies where barkeeps would uh, call in people's tabs. So that must be tabulation. I mean, we don't see that these days, hardly ever, if ever. But it is a form of complementary currency that was in common practice throughout many establishments for a very long time. And I think in our age of convenience of check cards and whatnot, we've lost that. That idea that we can make our own money on the fly. It's not that we're making money, it's just that um, we are using systems of record. And I suppose, I guess, essentially that's based on the honor system when it comes right down to it. In um, Switzerland, which is the home of international banking. There's something called Virbank, WIR Bank, which that's its current name, but when it was founded back in the 1930s, I believe that's when it started, it was known as, they speak German and a couple other languages in Switzerland because it's some cantons will also speak Italian, some cantons, fewer even, will speak French. And I've never been to Switzerland, but I hope they also speak English, at least enough of them. They had something called some German sounding name, and then added on to that was the idea of was economic circle. That's how it translated. So in an economic circle, you have people who do things for each other. There's a record of the thing done. So let's say this thing would have cost X number of dollars in terms of when you add up the supplies and the labor. Let's say I need a fence mended, as an example. It's going to cost so many board feet of lumber, and it's going to take so many hours. And also, if you're not using wooden pegs, who does that these days? Nail vendor, screws, hopefully screws. So there's a final price to that. Well, if I don't have the money, but it makes sense to get the fence done sooner than later, maybe I would have that on a system of record. And so long as there are enough people within the economic circle for whom I can provide my time and labor, so to speak, to pay off the debt that I generated with that one fellow, and that one fellow who repairs or mends my fence can also likewise make purchase within that economic circle. And that means that the community, and not only a monopoly or an oligopoly of banks, are able to make the economic activity flow. And I'm not saying make, but enable. That's a better way to put it. So what this could be declared as is a complementary, not I don't know if you'd call it a money system, but it is a complementary currency, but not based on a physical currency, but rather a system of ledger. And there are many versions of that are already in place throughout the world today. Usually they're referred to as LETS, which is an acronym standing for Local Exchange Transfer System. So there are potential downfalls to such a system. One potential downfall is you get the bad player, the one who doesn't want to operate according to honor. They run up big debts and then they die or otherwise disappear. You have to contend to that, because when that happens, that becomes basically a vagrant onto the system. So it would seem that one would have to be able to call in another's debts if they went too far. And when I look at the way that the banking system works today, between the banks, what they do, primarily I think this is automated, is that nightly all the gives and takes throughout these systems, all of our collective transactions go through a system of clearing. And so I would propose that any effective system of ledger does at least that. It does nightly clearing, so that there's both a clear understanding and record of account, who's got the debts, who's got the credits, and I think that can primarily be automated. But also there would have to be a way to work cross-jurisdictionally. Now, the question I'm going to propose, and what I'd like our group to explore this morning, is, does it remain local to, I don't know, your zip code, for instance, or your neighborhood. That's even smaller than the zip code. Or let's not say just your neighborhood, but it could be like your little subdivision within your neighborhood. And do you do it like that and clear with other subdivisions and neighborhoods? Or do you expand it out to the county? Do you expand it out to the state? Do you expand it out to the nation? Do you have to go so far as to create an international um, uh, clearing system, like a Bank of International Settlements, for instance, a mirror to that? Because if you can do it globally and get the nations of the world to recognize this complementary, interest-free, zero reserves, because this is basically mutual credit. It's people loaning their labor and time and goods and resources to one another for the purposes of just being able to take the limits, the shackles off economic activity. Would you be able to move then off of our debt money system, one that has a interest-bearing component, into this? And I'm not looking to compete, I'm just looking to complement. So would it be possible for the governments of the world, or at least certain nations, to treat that as legal tender? Because as soon as you do that, you can collect your taxes out of that means and fund your government and fund your economic activity outside of the debt money system. And without, I mean, I wouldn't abolish debt money, because I think there's always going to be a place for that, because there is always going to be people who are quote unquote credit unworthy. Because when you enter into a system or into a circle, an economic circle, you're basically making a promise to make good with your word. And good morning, Don.
Good morning. How you guys doing?
No difficult questions.
Ah.
Are we guys doing?
Are you awoke and seeing clearly?
I'm awake. I don't know if I'm woke yet, though.
I am awake because I don't think I ever slept all last night.
Goodness.
Wow. What was on your mind keeping you up?
Chat with a female, and then after a while, I started wondering if it was a chat GPT I was talking to. No, it was worse, because it would sometimes ignore my reply.
Like a real female.
Ah!
Must have been real female. But then maybe I was ignoring her request, so maybe I was doing it too. Synchronized.
There's a phrase for that, or I don't know if it's the appropriate phrase, but I call it out-of-band communication, meaning not operating at the pace that we would find acceptable if we were in the same actual room. And I've learned to accept it years and years ago, because this thing that we do online through the internet it's a secondary thing to life, and I feel that life has to take precedence.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So if you don't get back to me for 6 months, that's okay.
Nice.
I would reply with what I thought was a brilliant comeback. Then it was ignored with an alternate question that I wasn't expecting, or a response that, was she paying attention, because I replied a long writing, and then she immediately replied with a brief summary. How could she have read all that I had written?
Uh-huh.
Maybe it's a
TLDR. TLDR. Too long, didn't read.
that was the cause. I wrote too long, and she said, I'm not going to read that. I'm going to write what's on my mind. Take that.
Isn't it amazing how we all operate according to the models within our own minds, and that within those models are models of other people? So do we ever really know others? Because it seems to me we only ever know the models that we construct representing the others.
Maybe you chat with an AI girlfriend. And because the AI would read my replies and immediately come up with a response that was congruent with my request.
Or maybe the AI could be programmed to pause like a human might.
Pause.
Yeah, it's possible because I heard the AI that they've been using for like phone calls, and I've heard the AI becoming very, very savvy, very smart, how to have inflection in its voice at the right time, you know, mm-hmm, and pause, and you know, it's interesting to see it and hear it. I think pretty soon we won't be able to tell the difference.
It's absolutely key that we know.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to become. We'll adapt and become more sophisticated, being able to tell the difference. Well, some of us will, and others won't.
Right. Yeah.
What about having an AI president?
Don't
What
we already have one?
Right.
about putting an AI program, a chat that is supposedly AI, that it's really not. It's conducted by a staff of people answering, and they're trained to answer as if they were AI, to see if they could fool those who download the app into thinking that it was AI, that it's not. Could they get away with it?
Oh.
Well, in a way, I mean, we're different people depending upon the context that we're in. Uh, in the workplace, we're one kind of person, and with our friends, we're another. With our lover, we're another person. If we're a parent, we're a different person there, and um, if we're alone, with our thoughts. And we're maybe a whole slightly different person there again too. So depending upon the context, I think we're all sort of, in a way, who we are, but slightly modified. I'm not sure how that connects with your question though, Hyro. I guess what I'm saying is there is a depending upon the rule set or the context of the relationships that one finds himself within. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of consider when I'm attacking a problem, I think as though I were a soccer team. I know parts of me are for defense, and parts of me are for offense, and parts of me are just about remembering to keep the ball moving between the two, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
So would you like to know the topic of the day?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Wait a minute. What if Dawn has a topic idea? What is your topic idea, Dawn?
I didn't bring one because I thought that we already had one.
I thought that we didn't.
Oh, I thought you were putting ideas in that little,
Comments section.
Oh,
yeah. And in the chat, in that chat, messenger chat.
oh, really?
I
Oh,
think the
haven't
issue is we have 3 different places that we can put ideas.
haven't get-
Mm.
I never get on meetup.com to read the conversation. So maybe Bob
Ah.
had put an idea and Don had seen it and said, "Oh, okay, we have a topic." So now we have a topic.
I will remember, or at least attempt to remember from this point on, to paste any proposal, at least that I come up with, into the Facebook chat area.
Oh,
Okay. All right. I'll do the same.
oh,
I used to, because when you join the event, it asks you what topic would you like. And I used to put a topic there, but no one ever said anything about it. So I stopped. Now I put the word open
oh,
or okay.
oh. Maybe I should hire a staff to take care of that.
You might be getting so big, Hyro. You need a assistant.
Maybe
That
I'll hire some chat GPT.
And make sure she wakes up and thinks clearly.
PT that will listen to those topic suggestions and reply to them, and then what could it say? It could say, "Yeah, well, yes, that sounds like an interesting," and proceed to pull up suggestions for further reading, something like that.
It's important to differentiate between GPT and chat GPT.
Oh,
And it's also important to understand that these are all implementations.
no,
Where ChatGPT is a malleable product, GPT is the core product, and either are both going to be dependent upon their pre-training data sets and their subsequent interactions.
so Chat GPT uses GPT to have a chat with a human, and it's supposed to be like a pretty advanced, like Turing test, but the human knows that it's not a human, so it's not really a Turing test. But it could be if the human did not know that he was chatting with a chat GPT, maybe.
I was reading Toby Rogers, whose PhD studies were in intersubjectivity, and he was discussing in his most recent Substack post about the subject-subject relationship and the subject-object relationship. His advisor, when he was doing his PhD in 2014, had suggested that whereas Toby thought that subject-subject and anything that would increase intersubjectivity, which is just in between subjects, in other words, interactions between people, such as we have here. He thought that whatever increased that was good and we should work towards that. His advisor, however, thought that actually more people want subject-object relations, which Rogers thought were ones based upon dominance. And it'll be important for us to understand that we're entering into a world where with these GPTs, it is most definitely at least until consciousness or the consciousness is a tricky one, because you'll have, I think one writer thought that Galileo introduced the problem of consciousness. I suspect it goes much further back in history than that. But there have been in recent decades, or in the last decade or two, some who would obliterate the concept of consciousness altogether and say that it doesn't exist. However, there's also some who might claim that, well, that's just an attempt to establish subject-objectivity. In other words, an elite being the subjects and everyone else being the objects used there by the first smaller group. So if we're going to live in a world where each one of us has GPTs on call and at hand within the ubiquitous technology environment, such as I can go, okay, Google, what's the weather today?
Today in Orlando, there will be scattered showers with a forecasted high of 82 and a low of 67. Right now, it's 69 degrees and partly cloudy.
And Google, how long would it take me to get from here to Busch Gardens, Tampa Bay?
According to Wikipedia, Busch Gardens Tampa Bay is a 335-acre animal theme park located in Tampa, Florida, United States, with the entire park landscape and designed around themes of Africa and Asia. Owned and operated by SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment, the park opened on June 1st, 1959.
Okay, that's good, but it wasn't what I asked. What's the traffic between here and Busch Gardens? These things aren't perfect. Okay, Google. How long between here and Busch Gardens if I left right now?
With light traffic, it will take you 1 hour and 25 minutes to get to Busch Gardens, Tampa Bay by car.
Yeah, that's of course variable dependent upon how much of a rolling parking lot and sections and different parts of I-4. Or if I take back roads, it would be longer, of course, except for the times when it isn't.
Wow.
So imagine anywhere that we go, we always have that, because of course, most of us have these quote unquote smartphones on us, and that sort of technology will be just something that we'll grow accustomed to. Now, there are risks involved with that. One of the primary risks is data set poisoning. If someone wants to refer to NASA as UN, the UN program NASA instead of the USA administration, they refer to it as the United Nations Administration, NASA, which could just be a typo, honest mistake. Then subsequent people who ask about NASA will learn that it's a UN organization, not a product of the United States of America, for instance. And then when people look at, let's say, Apollo missions, they could also remove the flag of the United States of America. So 50 years from now, the early moonshots could be done with rockets where you never see an American flag because America never existed, for instance. And I say that just as an example of what would be easy to accomplish.
So the GPT through chat, or like through what you were doing just now, could be continuously learning and refining its database. But you're saying that some, or maybe I'm saying, or as an example, that there could be starting maybe with just one person, but very influential, an influencer would start saying something like that the database would say, no, that's misinformation or disinformation. But could it be said enough times that it would be added to its knowledge?
Right. So I gave an example of the disappearing case where you disappear the existence of a nation from the data set so that ChatGPT won't know what you're talking about, and all the people who get their information through these things, therefore, too, would not know what you're talking about. There's also the additive sense. Now, in the 19th century, there was a German, I guess you would call him maybe an ethnobiographer. There's a fellow, a very specific fellow, who came up with 3 words to define or to split the human species into. These words were Caucasian, of which he counted himself of that member, Negroid, and Mongoloid. The geneticists who came after him in the 20th century would say, actually, we're all one species. And it's interesting because of the Neanderthal and the crossbreeding, the European may actually have a greater chance of being something of a hybrid, because, for instance, one of Stacy and I's daughters has a bit of, which means either Stacy or I has a bit of Neanderthal in us. So somewhere up the line, there was a crossbreeding. But my point being, the introduction into the data set, which humans subsequently used, results today in government forms, school forms, loan forms, Census Bureau forms. Will ask you your race. Race being a
You froze for
human created construct.
You froze for 3 seconds.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what 3 seconds were lost, but I was mentioning race being a construct, the product of this one German fellow who, in trying to understand our own species, divided it into 3 groups. And out of those 3 groups are subsequent other constructs that then result in government forms asking for this thing called race. which has historical purposes if you're into doing something like maintaining a system of what's that called? Where you give preferential treatment to one group over another group based upon said construct. Forget what it's termed. But it's a thing that keeps limits the number of Asians entering Harvard, for instance, when their standardized math test scores are higher, and it maybe lets more blacks and or African Americans, depending upon how that form is written.
Affirmative action.
That's the one.
Ding ding.
Yes,
You have
thank you.
what's
Right.
behind
Well, affirmative action though is based upon there's a historical justification for it, but it's also based upon, when you roll it back, the initial splitting of the human species into these three groups. And to quite a degree, the quote unquote scientist who did this was using the long since debunked quote unquote science of phrenology, the structure of the skull and how that was supposed to relate to the features of the brain and the levels of the intelligence thereof. So how long do we allow ideas that are disproven to still affect policies? Probably to the extent to which they've produced negative externalities, especially in relation to justice, because we'll still have affirmative action until people have decided collectively, I think, that we no longer want to be separated as races any longer. So you have to first understand that these are constructs, and it's construct upon construct, because the multiple races derive from that initial breaking of the human species conceptually into the three groups. And you've got to decide, well, how much of that initially, the basis of that, since the underpinnings of that have already been washed away, how much of that are we going to hold to, and at what point are we going to let it go? And that of course is the big question that plays out politically in our nation, or one of the big ones.
And so many of us are not ready to have that conversation because they are identifying as a color.
Right. And that not well, there are deep seated reasons for that that go way
Yeah.
past, or way earlier than this century.
Yes.
However, one of the phenomena that I start recognizing early in the 21st century was the rise of it's not really about, and this is how it was framed, it's not about contacting your Congress person, and it's not about going out and let's say rallying or protesting. No, that's out. Forget about redress of grievances to your government, for instance, or protesting a local shop in your town. No, today's protest is based upon your identity. Well, that to me is like the greatest shackle ever placed upon this nation, because you're basically pigeonholing everyone into a locked, fixed sort of world that wherein you could take the identities and just near infinitely pit them against each other. I mean, people have to wake up that I am not my skin color, or the shape of my nose, or where I grew up, or what I even believe in. I mean, I'm if you're that, then you are manipulatable.
Does that include my sex?
Well, that's a great question, because in heaven there is no marriage. And what is sex but a strategy for reproduction?
Then God, our Father, is not our Father, but our mother. No,
Well,
it's asexual.
William P. Young's novel, The Shack, therein, God, for most of the story, is an African American woman, like a grandmotherly type figure. Only at the end does God become in the form of a father as needed. And when you read the Old Testament, I forget where specifically, but there is a very distinct prohibition against Asherah poles. It's interesting. Asherah in Arabic means 10. So that could be a unit of measure. But Asherah pole, in terms of the ancient God's chosen people, I suppose you could say, it was a very explicit prohibition, because Asherah poles always came in the form of male and female. And the reason why the prohibition existed, the reason why you could not set up, or why it was an anathema to set up Asherah poles within the portable tent, or in the temple, was because it lent this idea that God was male or female, and was thus making an idol. Because as soon as you attach even gender to God, you've stepped away from God and have entered into the realm of construct. And when you're constructing a God, what you're essentially doing at that point is merely creating an idol and worshiping said idol. And that, of course, breaks the commandment of having no God other than God. God is one, and God is all, and out of all.
Lord's Prayer
Yes.
fails because it starts out with our Father.
Our Father, right? Because within the New Testament context, there is God the Father and God the Son. And I think that's important within the context of Jesus being the Son of God, because without Jesus redefining as being the physical representation of
So does that mean that if there's no gender, no sex in heaven, then Jesus was a clone of God the Father?
Well, that's a extreme way of putting something that indeed he did say, because if he said, if you've seen the Son, you've seen the Father. I would not use the scientific term of clone, because when I think of them today, I think of them as a spiritual force, because of course Jesus ascended to heaven, and he did so that the Holy Spirit could come down and dwell within all believers. Now,
Another term for being able to bear a creature without resorting to sexual reproduction, is that called asexual reproduction? And that's also called hermaphroditism, or
well, it's interesting because it's already been found in sharks. Sharks can conceive in the absence of sperm. This has been scientifically proven. A shark without a male can actually become pregnant and bear new sharks without a male present. Of course, that's a much more ancient creature than our own species. So, and then there are other animals whose genders can alternate depending upon what else is in the environment.
Oh, and I learned, I read, or maybe I heard, no, most likely I read that there are trees that have
Gender,
a gender, and so they produce
either.
flowers that produce pollen,
Yes.
and so they would be called what? A female version of it, or what?
Yes.
maybe-
In fact, that was a real problem. Vox did, and a number of news agencies for a while were bugling that story that that developers, those who are planting the trees, primarily plant male trees because they don't produce fruit and thus litter the environment, or they just consider male trees more attractive. So they're planting more trees, and some are attributing the increases in allergies to the fact that we've got so much tree semen then in our atmosphere.
Yes, I read something to that effect.
Right.
That's interesting. I had not heard that.
Yes.
And there are trees that actually have both the fruit and the pollen
Right.
producing
Yes. They can
mechanism.
self-pollinate. Yep. And trees are interesting also because you can graft. For instance, anytime you eat a seedless orange, that is actually a clone of a single plant that was developed after years of cultivation that finally was producing seedless oranges down in Brazil in 1835. Every seedless orange you have ever consumed has been a clone because it has been where they cut off a part of that tree and then they plant it. And the other trees that are subsequent off that, they're all, or what they do is they graft it onto a regular tree. But that's how you get seedless oranges. You're eating the clone of a plant that was finally cultivated to such a degree that it would produce the orange, but without the seeds. And that was done all the way back in 1835 in Brazil.
So, how would Darwin take account of such evolution or survival of the fittest? Because in that case, and that also goes for the particular turkey that is most often cooked for Thanksgiving, when there were wild turkeys of all kinds, and now this one turkey got to survive.
Well, first of all, it's important to realize that the phrase survival of the fittest is not Darwin. That's Darwin's cousin, and that's the basis of social Darwinism.
Oh,
What Darwin wrote was those species best fit
by
for their
natural
environment
selection.
had the greatest likelihood, and who had the greatest likelihood of reproducing would be the
By
one which would propagate.
selection. But in this case, the natural selection is not so natural because it's man directed.
Right. Yes.
Social selection.
Right. Yeah, and we've done that as a species. Branches of us have done this thing called eugenics, which is the idea. I guess it was popularized first in the 19th century. Folks like the Theosophical Society, Madame Blavatsky, they had a real long-term plan, and they thought of the entire race throughout the course of time as operating through these epic periods. Epoch, not epic, IC, but EPOCH. Wherein through selection and I think the case of Blavatsky, she thought it was the charge for the women to decide the course or the nature or the direction of the species. And in fact, even here in our Central Florida area, there's a group of Theosophical Society people who've even been born of. They're still active. That's a group that did not ever go away. They might have gone quiet or silent, and they might not be promoted on the news. In fact, they aren't. But they do believe in promoting these ideas.
So this is like a survival of the fittest through
You're still you're still source poisoned.
selection.
You're still source poisoned because you're still referring to survival of the fittest, and that's understandable because you've heard the phrase repeated so many times. It's neurolinguistic programming. You hear something enough, it takes on the appearance of truth.
That be added to the GPT.
Well, I mean, if you want to go through something that rhymes with Nazism, but really, even the Nazis, when they were coming up with their system or their justification for their system, all they had to do was point to the United States, and they said, well, they did it there, and we ought to be able to do the same thing back here, because essentially we genocided the natives upon this continent or throughout the New World. So if we can do it, then they use that as justification that they could do it, and that's how that took place. And that's a hard, cold reality of the situation. But it's important to reinforce the thing that Darwin actually wrote in his work. And by the way, he had multiple editions, so his ideas were developing even as he was writing them. Okay, so I don't know if it was 3 or 5 editions or 6 editions that Darwin came up with when he did Origin of Species, but his own thinking evolved over the course of producing the work. And his cousin, who came up with quote unquote what became termed as social Darwinism, who introduced the idea of survival of the fittest, not only did that sort of lead to a lot of evil acts, and yeah, I'll be bold enough to make that claim, because I don't think it's that bold of a claim. But it's important, again, that we have to get, if we're saying Darwin, that we not use his cousin's phrase, that we use Darwin's phrase. Darwin's phrase is those species which are most advantageously fit for the environment. So if we're humans operating within a technological environment, then you and I, who've worked in IT, throughout the course of our lifetime, we've seen ourselves within an environment in which we could flourish because we had the skills, or we were willing to develop the skills necessary in order to flourish within the environment of businesses with computers, and those businesses needing folks who would be expert in those computers, and thus we were able to make a living. That's an example of members of the species most or best fitting or adapting to the environment that they find themselves within. And then those of us who then reproduce would produce, the idea there is that they too, those offspring would also likewise, of that generation, of that set, those who are most able to adapt and, I guess, to the environment, and then gain the appropriate resources and find a mate and reproduce. That which I guess kind of ties into something I've always thought, but I never really connected it with Darwin before. It's how the environment shapes the people. If you go to a place where there are mountains and there are valley people, and it could be that there's one population in one valley and another population in another valley, and their language is slightly altered or different, or maybe they don't interact, or people who come up who grew up in Colorado, let's say Western Colorado, where there are mountains, not the eastern side where it's plains, and people who grow up in let's say Florida or Maryland or Massachusetts, or Ghana, Um, each one of those kinds of environments are going to shape the people out of them, because those environments require a unique sort of specialized set of skills. And just the process of acquiring those skills or taking on those skill sets, because we can be trained to to operate in more or less any place. We're a very adaptable species. But just the fact that we have them kind of shapes us, and those of us who are successful in those environments are the ones who tend to be the ones who breed and produce the next generation of said same species.
Can you go over what you detected was had come about through the works of and the followers of Madame Blavatsky, the
Well, a lot of my knowledge, because I spend so much time studying as much of anything that interests me at any particular moment, is still unlocking. I try to just pull enough to
that
create
that you
hooks
could say
to hang the memories of them.
that she had an idea of, was it to improve
Right, that's her idea based upon her precepts.
human race in some way?
Yeah, well, she thought that we would operate through stages, but not only did she and her followers or the folks who influenced her as well believe that that we operate in epoch stages of development, but they also thought or felt that it was their responsibility, their charge, to actually play an active role in seeing their vision through.
So that could have been an influence on maybe Nazism or what?
It goes deeper than that, because Nazism is more of a consequence. It's more of a I mean, to certain adherents, it would have been a cause, but it was a weak cause. It's more of a product or a result, or there's a specific a consequence. It was a consequence of a series of factors, including and starting with the failure of the Weimar Republic to have proper monetary controls. So when you wanted to buy a loaf of bread, you had to have a wheelbarrow worth of Deutschmarks, and they weren't even counting the currency; they were weighing it.
Is that a form of inflation?
That was
Or did-
hyperinflation. Yes, there was a lady, a German lady who went to Austria for a ski trip, and she broke her leg, and she was convalescing for 18 months, and she wasn't keeping in contact with what was going on at home back in Germany. And when she got home, she found 3 letters. One letter says, they were all from her bank. The first letter says, due to the troubling rise of inflation, we suggest that you move your savings into such and such investment vehicle. That was letter 1. The second letter was your, like, what would have been, let's say, for us, $20,000 or $30,000 worth of savings. The second letter was along the lines of your savings are now below our minimum deposit requirement. And then the third letter was a check saying, because your savings is now below the minimum deposit requirement, here is a note of the current here's a check in the new currency, and it was worth like 13 cents. Something ridiculously low. And all that occurred while she was convalescing from a rather nasty broken leg. So when hyperinflation happens, it happens quickly and unexpectedly, and people just get wiped out. Happened in Zimbabwe
How
in our lifetimes.
this be a segue into systems of exchange?
Yes, systems of exchange, our topic, our topic of the morning. So what Switzerland did, and I was mentioning this, Don, to Jairo earlier before he came on board, in the 1930s, in that sort of economic situation that was described, because, of course, the world was undergoing a global depression at the time. There was a group who created what is known as, in English, we would call it the Swiss Economic Circle, wherein businesses and merchants and trades persons would, they agreed to operate, they basically set up their own complementary currency so as to enable economic activity, because people didn't have a strong whatever the unit of currency was there in their own land. So they agreed to extend to each other something that is commonly known as mutual credit, but they actually did it using a physical currency, and I think they had an exchange rate of like 4/5 to the actual. So if you wanted to actually buy into this currency, it would, or no, it did usually operate the other way, because not all merchants would take a 1-to-1 pairing to whatever the actual. They didn't use dollars in that country, but let's say, I'll accept in that economic circle's version of currency, I'll accept 80 cents to the dollar. So I can go to work for someone and get credit and be paid in this locally contrived interest-free currency that's been developed as a complement to the national currency, but that's sort of people-powered because it's based upon the faith that the people have in the workings of that economic circle. And so they would some merchants, let's say if you wanted to go have dinner, they would accept it, but they would accept it at 80 cents on the dollar of that smaller economic circles self-created form of medium of exchange. And we've had, like, we do that already, actually. The Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, I think at least a ninth of the country buys their groceries through a complementary currency. That's I think JP Morgan usually handles the card processing, but that's on par, and there's no tax even associated with that. So it's not like there aren't examples already in the environment where that occurs. And in terms of the real economic flows, because all money can do, and it's only a degree to efficiency that it does that, all money can do is really describe the exchanges of energy amongst beings. The reason why we can have a SNAP program is because on the other side of it, we also subsidize our farmers, and sometimes we even subsidize our farmers not to grow in order to stabilize or keep prices at a certain sort of controllable rate, so as to maintain a steady state of how much food there is in the world, so as not to make the farmers go out of work. But at the same time, you also run the risk, because if you have too many farmers not growing, it means you could actually create famines if that were your objective.
Interesting.
Did you hear what happened with the Dutch in Netherlands? I'm sorry, I say Dutch, Netherlands. I'm not really from that part of the world. Although there are other Ramis who grew up there. I know that because one of the librarians at my college was from the Netherlands, and she heard my name. Oh, are you from my land? But yeah, the Dutch farmers, they actually have taken over the government over there. Or and I forget which city it was based around. It could have been Brussels, perhaps, or it could have been a different city. But the government had imposed regulations on nitrogen, how much you can put in, and how many emissions could come out of your livestock. And this would have basically put a bunch of farmers, who are some of the most productive farmers in the world, off their farms. And I think the regulations were put in order to increase the size of the city. And what the farmers did, besides merely protesting, is they formed their own new political party. And this party became so popular that they won all the votes and they actually took over the government. Which is wonderful because it's decentralization, and it's people who are dedicated, who are peacefully actually having a revolution. Can you imagine that? A bloodless revolution just occurred in North Central Europe. I mean, maybe a
That's
few people killed at
amazing.
some point. Yeah, that is amazing, is it not?
Mhm. It can be done. You don't have
Yes.
to have war.
Yes. I'm going to be quiet for a while because I've been dominating the conversation for quite some time.
Well, you're doing good with this topic that we've got. That's why I said don't be quiet for a while. Everybody gets their spotlight turn. It's your turn to be in the spotlight because you're knowledgeable on this topic.
And if I have to step away at any time, it's because I'll have to take care of my son or take care of my wife. And also, we're going to Nathaniel's Hope today, which started 7 minutes ago and will run till about 1, maybe 1:30 p.m. this afternoon at Lake Eola, which is the center of Orlando, our Central
Uh,
Park.
You were suggesting in the system of exchange, the the overall system of exchange in a nation or in a
Right. That's the question I wanted to kind of explore. And Don, I think your experience may actually come in handy big time here. There are the primary criticism of a mutual credit system, for instance, is that a bad actor could always run up debts and then disappear. Like they'll run up debts and they'll die, or they'll run up debts and they'll move to another country to escape them.
Right.
And we have something like that here, but then we also have treaties of extradition.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, do we have something like the LETS, the local exchange transfer system, which is one that's usually based around a local community, usually somewhat isolated communities. They can create systems of exchange, which are LETS, local exchange transfer systems, that are either based on physical currency or books of ledger.
What is the technical word that you use to describe this subset that can be implemented in parallel with the regular system of exchange?
Complementary currency?
Is that what it's called? Complementary currency? Is that
Yeah.
where you
Yeah,
ledger?
Verbank, which is the contemporary, still alive today, that Swiss economic circle exists today in the form of Verbank, WIRBANK. You can look it up.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of, like, the whole Verbank exists for Switzerland. There are a lot of towns and cities throughout the United States who have lets. There are ones here, even here in Central Florida. They're basically economic circles that act as, I suppose, clubs or clearinghouses, but it's just another way to have or drum up business for the participants.
How does a credit union work?
Well, exactly. A credit union is a very light form of the same, because the idea there is you are part member of the credit union. You have to have, let's say, at least $5 in an account. That's your base amount. It always stays there. And to the degree to which you hold money, which is to say the store of value aspect of money, to that degree, that's how much of the credit union you're owning, because it's all member owned, right? And that gets into the difference between ownership and management, or if you were to put it in another set of tools, ownership, or it's the difference between wealth and power, because power is something which is political, but it's dependent also upon wealth. And I'm going to tie that to the Constitution of the United States of America, because and with that you have to sort of link in the Declaration of Independence. And my wife is already calling me, but my only point being is that the nebulous term in those documents is people. When they say "we the people," are they referring to those who merely sign the document, or are we also including all those who more or less go along with it? And I got to attend to my wife for a bit, so.
Why, if it's political, but also power is political, but also based on wealth, and so that wealth helped Donald Trump gain political power enough to become president for one term and almost a second term, but it was stolen, they said. And oh, maybe it was. But anyway, if wealth can translate into power, why doesn't Bill Gates become president? He's far more wealthy than Donald Trump, isn't he? And he's not running any company except maybe his philanthropies. Why couldn't he run and become president easily?
I thought, doesn't he have a bad rap? He has basically people don't have a overall favorable view of the Gates family, right? Gates and Bill and Melinda. I mean, some do, but
Then
I hear many don't.
what's him?
Right. And before that, they didn't have a favorable view. I don't know. I think that the system that we have has to crumble. It's crumbling, but too many of us are still identifying as male, female, husband, wife, Democrat, Republican. They're still playing the game. And while they're playing the game, they have given over their choices. They've given away their ability to make a different choice instead of following the same old same, taking back their power without violence by choice, what they choose to participate in.
I am giving up choice of becoming a woman by identifying as a man.
Okay.
And the
Mhm.
thing goes for other slots that I go into, I identify or am forced to identify. Or if
Mm.
I wish to vote for a progressive candidate, I would have to in the primaries declare myself a Democrat so that I have access to the choice of voting for a progressive candidate, because the progressive candidates are forced into running against the Democrat. They, they, they don't have enough strength to form a third party in this two-party system.
That's right. Yeah. Mm. But I don't know if Bill Gates could be elected president or not. I just know that he seems to prefer to operate on a different level. And I believe he's actually more powerful than the president anyway. So, interesting. So what else? So the topic for today, I'm still a little confused about it. Rami did a good job of, I guess, talking about, um, Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society that's still operating today, which I recently found out about as well. But also, what is all of that tying into our topic today? How do we discuss this topic?
So, just a footnote with regard to Bill Gates. Microsoft, just as a point in history, as a corporation, has produced more millionaires than any other company in the history of the earth. Now, that may come in handy.
Mhm.
The reason why I brought up the topic of the day, which is systems of exchange, is, and the reason why I gave examples such as the Swiss Economics Circle,
Mm.
is that if and or when we enter into a next Great Depression, if that occurs, it sure would come in handy, wouldn't it, if the people themselves had the ability to interoperate their own system of exchange so that the economies let's say local economies specifically, would continue to exist in the absence of things such as money and or credit. And for years now, I've been contemplating creating the software necessary in a modifiable sense and in a free and open source way,
Oh,
necessary so that any set of people, whatever the size, I don't know what the size would be able to take that software and utilize it as a tool to keep their local economies going.
I get it. You're suggesting that, for example, the candy store owner who kept a ledger of what's the name of the candy?
In that case, it was like just penny candies or butterscotch. Talking about over
Butterscotch.
40 years ago.
They would cost a penny each, and the little kids would come in without any money, and they would get placed on the ledger, with their names, and yeah, the owner or the person at the desk at the register would, oh, you don't have any money? Okay, I'll put your name on the ledger, and you put one. You're taking one? Okay, one. And maybe you'll come back the next day and get another one. So he'll tick mark his name again, and so on. And maybe after a while, the parent shows up and pays for what was owed. Maybe the store owner would call the parents and say, your kid owes me $20 worth of candy. Probably be 20 cents. So in the case of doing a ledger for those kinds of transactions, while there is actual money going on, being handled the usual way with banks and all, and giving out loans with interest. So in the case of where the hyperinflation causes the money to be worthless, the people that have been using the ledger, there would be a way to kind of equate the amount owed with something that is stable to what that candy is worth. So they would become made independent of the value of the money, but made to have a virtual money that is not fluctuating so much, and maybe more relative to something else besides the gold standard or the dollar standard or whatever the banks decide. Maybe something that from that would translate to what everything is on that ledger, and it's more reasonable, more that'll work for everyone. That won't cause one to have to carry a wheelbarrow of pennies to buy a loaf of bread. So Rami is suggesting that a software could do that.
I guess. Um, There's so much that we don't know what we can do. That's the thing. There's so many things that's possible. I think more things are possible than impossible.
Oh, so Rami maybe was suggesting that in the case of a hyperinflation, then
Mhm.
people would get on board with this this ledger system that is independent of whatever the value of the nation's money was doing. That would be more reasonable for everyone in the community, so that they could deal with being able to buy things reasonably without using money, but more like using a ledger. And then maybe when things settle down and money is worth a little more, then the person would pay their IOU with that money. I don't know. Or maybe they could pay their IOU through bartering or something.
I think we already are on a ledger system because I think that the money that was given, the stimulus money, for the most part, they tried to make it digital. They tried to tell people it's going to take forever for you to get it if you want it in paper. And at the same time, they seem to be showing that they could pull cash from the system at any time. And people were saying, well, where did this money come from? It's easy, it's simple, it's zeros and ones on a computer. That's where it came from. They just put numbers into your bank account and there you have money. It is a ledger system already at this point. There is, if people, I don't believe that there is enough cash printed right now that if everybody said, give me my money in cash from all banks, from all accounts, I don't think there is enough cash to go around at right now. They'd have to print more, I believe. But uh, we are, and also many of us already have our money in different forms, like you described before. It's already in some kind of a different exchange system already for some of us. We receive different types of currency. So, and then finally, I was going to say, years ago, when I was still in Hawaii, I became a part of a barter system, businesses bartering system, and it seemed to be very flat. It couldn't grow because we didn't have enough resources. We didn't have enough types of businesses. So I accepted this currency of this bartered currency, but I had very few places I could spend it because there wasn't enough participation at the time. It takes a while to get on board with the new currency, but then our government always seemed to find a way to shut them down. And recently they've been able to shut down digital currencies. That's a significant happening.
Wow. You mean like Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to jump into it with, well, I got a tip about a particular coin, but and that person supposedly made a whole lot of money, and he was telling me about it, and that person never did get his money out of it. He apparently we had like someone had given him some, and then he bought a little bit more. I think his total investment may have been like $500, but it was like up to $45,000 at one point. So, and he was telling me about it, and I was like, "Oh my God, pull your money out!" But I guess he didn't. He never did. So that coin had to crumble. It was unstable.
Wow. Hmm.
I think it was Doge. Yeah, Dogecoin.
Oh, it it was called Dogecoin.
Yeah, I bought some. It never did, it only tanked. I only lost money. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, very interesting.
Hmm. And I heard Rami once say that there's this economist that studies cycles of when the money when hyperinflation happens, where things like the Great Depression happen, and he's saying that it happens the way it's structured. It should be predictable, and it's happening in cycles of roughly 26 every 26 years. Huh.
Interesting.
Or maybe it's a little flex, maybe it gets squashed. Hmm.
Very interesting. But I do know that there's a lot going on right now on the world stage, and it's hard to keep up with just the amount that comes through my, information circles. But to look at the entire thing, almost as if standing above it and looking down at all the pieces moving would be
Hmm.
amazing. I'd like to see exactly what it looks like, what our world looked like in 2020 before the pandemic was set off, and what it looks like today. I would love that.
Hmm. 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 But hmm. And how does bartering work as a subsystem of exchange in parallel or within the overall system of exchange in a society? Systems of exchange, maybe, or mm,
So, my experience with
and the
bartering has
government
been
and banks. Hmm.
my experience with bartering has been that it's each group has it's a bartering is a um like a construct. It's like the framework, and then you have to fill in how your system is going to operate. You have to build your rules in, and but basically it's an agreed upon um rate of exchange for different services, or products. You could include product as well, but it depending on how your bartering is set up. So the one I was involved in, it was like a account. Basically, you had a bank account, and it was it was, 1-for-1 dollar exchange, so that you could basically write your little check. So you had a little checkbook or coupon book that you could write and use from your accounts, to make your money move around within the system. And I thought that that was a smart way to do it, So basically, it was just like dollars, but it was really money on a ledger. So it's just the two of us now, Hyro. So maybe we should get off of here.
Oh, oh, he may be back. He
Oh,
was
he may come back.
he, he was just pulled away.
Yes.
And there's Joel in, where is he now? Tor- Toronto? Or is
Mm.
he in Tennessee? Or is he in, where could Joel? What could
Where
Joe be
in the
next?
world is Joe Vinci?
Hmm.
Almost like where in the world is Carmen San Diego?
Hmm. And so where do you put your money for that you are able to invest? I guess in your property and maintaining it. If you have one, have a house.
Yeah, that depends. On the, and I guess everybody has their own idea of what's best. I don't particularly believe that having a large piece of property, and well, that also has its caveats, but having a large piece of property and building it up and making it beautiful and lavish is not necessarily smart, because you can't take it with you. And when you retire or when it's time for you to get older, it won't benefit you. In other words, it's not going to bring you any kind of
Mm,
revenue if it's just built on how it looks. But if it's built up to bring revenue in, which I'm intrigued by, having your property be a revenue stream as well, that would be smart, I think. So, like if it's also a farm, or if use a piece of, you have a large plot of land and you use it to maybe do parties, or let people rent it out and weddings or whatever. It would be nice, because it's bringing you, and it could be for many years to come. I think that's brilliant.
there was a silence for about 6 or 7 seconds. It was like I couldn't hear anything else from you. That then you came back,
Well, something weird happened on your side. Your video
got
blipped out.
disconnected.
Yeah, and then reconnect.
My side, maybe my interest. You still had good internet, but maybe I wasn't getting what you were saying.
Oh, sorry about that.
'Cause I got like maybe my internet is it's Wi-Fi and it's Spectrum, but it's far away from the base from the router or the Wi-Fi tower in the
Oh,
house.
oh, yes.
I got a like a repeater that I
Mm,
put in the room to or hmm,
yeah,
it
extender. It's a Wi-Fi extender. There, you just froze up. I'm just frozen.
6 seconds of what you were saying, and then it came back.
And there
What
you are. You're back now. Because it
what
just froze up again, and then now you're back.
what were you saying about what some people that you don't believe in
Some
what
people,
in
yes, some people believe in building up their properties to these luxurious, spaces that look beautiful and lavish, but they have no purpose except to look expensive and to, show beauty, which I think is great. Showing beauty is great. But I don't believe all of this material things is the way to go. And then I realized that some other people have found a way to make their properties also work for them, if they're to make them into a revenue stream, like if it's a farm, so that you can sell farm raised products. And also some people will rent out their property as a party rentals or, wedding venue. So there's options to make your property work for you, and then it can become a wonderful, investment.
Hmm.
Otherwise, I don't really believe in buying up properties like like in these little suburbs and stuff like that. I mean, because all they do is keep buying and selling the same property over and over and over and over again. Somebody keeps making money off of this one, off of every property that's sold, which to me is ridiculous. My opinion, to segue slightly, is that we should be able to use living spaces while we are alive. And we use them, we pay tax on them, we upkeep them, and when we pass away, we move out of them. That's what I think. I think that we should have living spaces for people to use while they're alive.
Hmm.
No need to buy. Why buy? Buying is hoarding in some cases.
What about a house? An owner of the house or co-owner, one of the owners is a disabled person, and the other owner is the the child of that person. So the disabled one is elderly, it's the parent, and so and the house is large enough so that there's a vacant room, and that person or the manager of the house could add another person to live there, rent it out in such a way that they would also have another disabled person there. And that way, the person that takes care of the elderly would be now taking care of two elderly persons. And it would be an extra load, but that person maybe would get more support and increase in wages maybe also. And the additional disabled person would be bringing in money through Social Security and disability to pay for that extra room and maybe to pay for the extra care if they continue with the one person caring for both. Trying to repurpose the house situation.
Lots of different options. And Joel has joined us. Good morning, Joel.
Good morning, Florida.
Where is Joel located this time? What country?
He is north of the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Is that the land where the songwriter who recently let go of his body, who wrote some wonderful songs?
Did she mention my name?
Gordon Lightfoot.
Gordon Lightfoot? I love
Yeah.
Gordon Lightfoot.
Yeah.
He was from Toronto, perhaps?
I don't think he was from Toronto. I don't know what part of Canada he was originally from, but no, I don't think it was Toronto, but I could be wrong. I was once wrong in 1946. Who else has been here this morning?
Rami.
Rami has come and went.
Yes, and interesting characters were mentioned, like hmm, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, Bill Gates, and Charles Darwin, and others.
And the Theosophical Society in Florida was mentioned.
What is the Theosophical Society?
That's
Mm,
the group that was formed way back in the day. Blavatsky was a member of that group, and they're, I guess, one of several groups that were formed to carry the truth about what's really going on our planets and how the mysteries work. But at one point, that group was supposedly supporting eugenics what or
mm,
something that was eventually termed eugenics. And they've got a bad rap for it. Basically, they um, want to direct or control the direction of society by controlling or I want to say, what's the word, Hyro, to weed out the not so strong members of society.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Oh, and I go to theosophical meetups, and one of them is on studying the Bhagavad Gita.
Mm.
Another one, it was studying the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, and then some others are general and maybe reading from one of the great scholars of theosophy, maybe a certain particular book, and they go through, take turns reading verses, and then they think about it, and maybe somebody shares their opinion or interpretation, and or they might start by saying, oh, and that reminds me of this, and or they might say, oh, so that is interesting, I never thought of that, and things like that. Oh. Ah, hmm.
But Joel, I wanted to ask you, ever since I saw your Seven Fingers shirt, I wanted to I wanted to hear about what you know about that.
About what do you mean by that?
The seven streams or seven rays.
Hmm.
Well, all I know is he's got the whole world in his hands, and the seventh prime number is the Vinci board. Everything
Oh.
else is hearsay.
And I hear say of I see I have a email from some Venti player.
You mean not Dominic, Danny?
It's a person named Joel.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, checking in to see if we are ready to get our group going. And I say, yes, I'm ready now.
Okay, but Danny is no longer ready. It's some people, are not patient enough to play Vinci asynchronously. So because of the time shift, I expected that might happen, that the enthusiasm wanes. Some people need a more rapid response. And Danny has decided that he would not continue with this venture.
Got you.
But I have another lady in California who goes by the name Creation, and she says she's willing, but I'm not sure if she will have the patience to continue asynchronously, but it does solve the time shift problem. and we'll see. I only see her periodically at a group in Denver.
Mm.
Or no, I'm sorry, Houston. I don't know where these groups are, excuse me, because I all I know is I log into Zoom and there they are. So I just deal with it
What?
that way.
What is asynchronous communication, and how does one determine whether one is conducting an asynchronous discussion or a synchronous discussion? Here in Wake Up and Think Clearly, we must think clearly about whether our communication here is asynchronous or synchronous.
Well, I'm not sure of the formal definition, but the understanding that I took from this, and this was pointed out to me by a data scientist in Texas, that the proper name for playing Vinci via email, as opposed to as I played with your mother and others here online, is asynchronous versus synchronous. So we're now talking synchronously, contemporaneously, at the same time or very proximate. I speak, you are arguably listening, and then you speak, or Dawn speaks, or whoever else is here. Whereas asynchronous would be I send you an email, and when it is appropriate or available for you, you may read it and respond. So reading is asynchronous, speaking in person is synchronous. At least that's the way I understand it.
So which one is superior, or do they have their purposes, their benefits, their pros and cons?
I don't know. I would assume they both have pros and cons. For me, asynchronous allows you time to reflect, whereas a debate, most people don't have the patience to reflect and then respond or take the meaning. They prefer instantaneous understandings, which may be more prone to error.
What about a chat conversation? Is that considered asynchronous or synchronous, or it's dependent on the person responding? If the person responding is responding as soon as they get the inquiry or whatever, and it starts replying then and there, then it would be moments of synchronicity, of synchronization. But if the person steps out for coffee and doesn't see that the person he was chatting with has already submitted an inquiry, and so the person saying we'll say we'll wait and wait, and then he'll write, are you still there? And so at that time it is asynchronous, and then after the person comes back from the coffee break, then he responds and says, yes, I wasn't here, I was taking a coffee break, now I will answer your question. So there, in chatting, it's both synchronous and asynchronous, I would submit.
Well, I would agree with you, but I think that everything is always a combination of synchronous and asynchronous, unless you define the interval between speech or writing and response. So even though I'm speaking now live, so to speak, at least the little button on my screen says live, Dawn's image is not showing, and she may be off making herself a coffee or not paying attention. You may be, chanting in your mind and not really hearing me or listening to me. And I have no idea whether you will respond contemporaneously to when I finish speaking, or even interrupt me, or at all, or just type a response. So it's communication is always a complicated thing, and it's never certain whether it's instantaneous response or delayed response, or some people may have speech impediments that even though they have a response in their head, there's some mechanism within their being, their ontology, that won't allow them to respond quickly. Or they're just slow talkers.
Hmm. So, what you said while you were saying it, and I was paying attention, that would be an example of synchronous communication, because you were speaking, you were playing the role of the speaker, the storyteller, and I was playing the role of the listener in trying to digest the information. And so it was happening synchronously, or although there may be a delay in my capturing what you were saying and then processing and determining what interpreting what you were saying. And then after you're done, I would respond, although there might be a delay in my response, because I would have to wake up and think clearly about it for a while. And so maybe it's semi-synchronous. Delayed synchronous.
Very interesting topic conversation we're having. Yeah. It's interesting to me how communication is, we try to say, well, these are the components that you need for a successful communication. And my experience has been that it doesn't always work. It's so different depending on who you're talking to. So, for example, I just had a friend visiting from Virginia, and this particular friend, it doesn't matter if you're standing in front of him yelling in his face, or if you are across the room talking to him. If he doesn't want to be interested in paying attention, he doesn't. Even if he's talking to you, he's not paying attention. I mean, if he's actually speaking, he's not always paying attention to what he's saying. And you think that people would be more engaged when you are in front of them, but that's not necessarily the case. And I've experienced that with him during his visit here, that he will, and I don't understand why it happens, but he will drop interest in what we're talking about just at the drop of a hat. He doesn't even realize he's done it. He'll just be off thinking something else.
Wow.
And
I had 2 seconds, maybe 3, maybe 4 seconds of blanking out. So I missed maybe a phrase or two of Don's exposition. So what we have here is failure to communicate
yes.
on my part.
It could be my signal is bouncing over here too. I don't know what's going on with our internet, but I do think that
Oh, you, I didn't hear any interruptions. I was just sleepy, and I turned off for a few seconds, and then I realized, oh, I'm asleep, so I better wake up. So I woke up and
mm,
thought clearly.
Do you
not clearly.
do you suffer from narcolepsy at all, Jairo?
Oh, wow. What is the definition of narcolepsy?
I think it's when people just fall asleep unpredictably to some extent.
Oh, I did have a few accidents, car accidents, as a result of something like that. Let's see. Back in 1993, maybe 92, 91, 92, 91. I did driving on the highway. I must have had a moment of narcolepsy, and I hit the car in front, and that woke me up. And then when we stopped, and nothing happened, and the person that got hit in the rear didn't proceed to charge me. Oh, or something. Let's see. But could I attribute this moment of narcolepsy to the mm, mm, to my lack of sleep? I haven't slept all night.
Well, I don't know, but I only know you in passing from the Zooms, and there have been several occasions where you have fallen asleep, and I accepted your explanation that you didn't sleep one night or you're out karaokeing or whatever you were doing, and that sounds quite plausible. But I wonder if it's another pattern that is operant there, and I don't know how they define that or diagnose that,
And
but
I
whether it's anything you've thought about.
that when I stop at a stoplight, I may turn off for a second, and then if I don't turn back on, I may get honked on, and then I turn on. That's happened a few times.
Well, I've been to places where I've seen people fast asleep at their car wheel at a stoplight. And in the middle of the day, and you kind of wonder, did they have a heart attack? Are they, what's going on? But I remember once actually was in California, and I didn't know what to do, and didn't know whether to honk but people have guns there, so you're a little more circumspect about what you do.
I remember being when I first got to Hawaii when I was 14 years old. And I was put into a school, but I was too advanced for that school compared to my studies before coming into Hawaii. So I spent a lot of time like helping out in the office. And I was entering student information. I was 14 years old, and I was entering student information into the database. And next thing I know, someone had their hand on my right shoulder asking me if I was okay. And I was like, yeah, I'm okay. What are you talking about? And they said that I was non-responsive. I was sitting there with my fingers on the keyboard, and I was asleep, basically. And they said it had happened several times. I found that very odd. So they had me, had a representative take me to get evaluated and get my blood, taken. Turns out I have iron deficiency. And at that time, I had severe iron deficiency. And iron deficiency can make you fall asleep at odd times. Like your energy plummets at odd
Isn't that
times.
interesting?
Yes. And I still deal with that iron deficiency issue to this day. I believe it's something that's, in my issue in my DNA. But anyway, yeah, it could be narcolepsy. It could be that there's some type of a deficiency.
How do you deal with an iron deficiency, Dawn?
It's very, very difficult because I believe some things absorb the iron in my absorb the iron in my body. And I can actually, it just took so long for me to get to a point where I'm actually paying attention and listening to the body. And now I can tell. So if I eat sugary items, I can feel like almost like a sucking of nutrients out of my body, and I can feel that I am drained. It's not like where I don't get a sugar high in the first place, but what it does is it seems to pull out iron and maybe a few other things I haven't yet understood. Then I realized there are things that support the iron so that it helps me absorb it better. So maybe what I have is an iron absorption defect.
Oh,
That's interesting. Yeah, because I mean, I find that I have always fallen asleep, or friends tell me that even from a younger age, I would sometimes fall asleep very easily if we're having a big meal or something. And then it was common for me to sometimes sit down for a conversation and fall asleep, which, apart from appearing to be rude, may be something physical. And like your iron deficiency, I don't know whether it's, got some kind of a nutritional or genetic root to it. But
Yeah.
I remember one time we were having a meeting here, and there was just Hiro and Dom and I, and Dominic was speaking, and I nodded off completely. And when I woke up, Hiro was asleep as well, and Dominic was kind of berating us for for not listening, And when by the time I woke up, I realized, I wonder how long I've been gone. Hiro was in deep sleep, and Dominic was quite perplexed by it at that time. But
Dominic, maybe he thinks he has the power to put people to sleep now.
well, I don't know. I don't know that he thinks that, but it was an interesting phenomenon. How can you be mad at somebody because they fell asleep, or should you be mad? I mean, it does seem like, you're not paying attention to them, which may be an insult. And I've noticed that a lot of people just want somebody to listen to them.
Yes.
They maybe it's not so much that they're not saying anything interesting. I go walking with people, and we stop for coffee afterwards, and I've observed they're all older people, and they're not having a conversation, even though it is synchronous. They really just want to hear their voice.
Mm.
Sometimes what they say is very relevant and interesting, like with anybody. Some people even think I may occasionally say something interesting, but they're usually quite simple people. but it's been my observation that they just want to be, saying something. Whether anybody's listening or not is entirely secondary, or what they're saying, if it's interesting or not, is similarly
would would recording what one is saying and then going back to listen to it, that would satisfy that one is able to express oneself, and then later on one is able to listen to oneself, so you have achieved talking and having someone listen, but it's yourself.
No, I think it's the fact of another human being there live that is a satisfying form of companionship. I believe. I don't know, but I'm not a scholar. And I
It
don't
may feel like validation to some people, what you're saying.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the case. So just for the record, I hereby validate you, Hiro, and I validate you, Dawn. And now that we got that out of the way, should we go and watch the coronation of King Charles?
Oh,
Of
thank you,
course.
Joel. And no, thank you, Joel.
I validate Joel too. May my validation of Joel
Joel.
bring joy to Joel. He has been validated. And I also validate Dawn with all her expressions and conversations and sharings. I validate them all, even though I may have missed a few seconds when I dozed off. All
Thank
that.
you.
I
Thank
hope
you. I miss Dominic. I miss Dominic on our calls.
Well, Dominic has started to go back to the humanist meeting in Toronto.
Oh, is that a live meeting, in-person meeting?
No, it's on Zoom. Everybody's welcome. But he was he was used to go, and then he would type in the chat quite frequently and extensively, and it perplexed some of the people. But he seems to be much more contained now than he was at that time. I don't know. I mean, he hasn't been there regularly, but I noticed that he's coming back again.
Oh, that's good. I'm
Yeah, I
glad.
think it,
Mhm.
Mhm. And you remember he just lost his cat.
oh no,
His
not that
companion.
world champion Vinci playing cat.
It could be.
Uh-oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Maybe
the
that's
lady
why
from
he's
Japan.
reaching out to have more different companionship with the humanists.
Could be. But that I
Uh,
think was around the last time I was here to talk to him. But yeah, but as far as watching the coronation of King Charles, is it King Charles? Or
I
is he
think
now?
so. King Charles III as opposed to Ray Charles the First.
And he's no longer Prince Charles, right?
I don't know if you can be a prince and a king at the same time. I'm not really up on these princely kingly things.
And I'm not up on in the royals at all, really. I remember growing up and watching my mom. It was always on TV. Anything that had to do with the royals, it would be on. It would seem like for hours. And I remember she was always excited and, exhilarated about what was going on with them. I have no interest in them today. I'm not ashamed of that.
So Dawn, just while I have you here, shall I write to Creation in California telling her that you're willing to engage in a training game with her?
Yes, I'm ready. I finished up my major part of my tax season. I took a couple weeks to catch up on whatever loose ends I needed to do. And I also took some hours off and I had a guest visit during those times. So, whew, I'm ready.
Okay. And Hiro, are you asleep or are you ready to learn Vinci? I think Hiro is gone asleep.
I'm asleep.
Oh,
But,
I've heard of sleepwalking, but this is sleep talking.
It is.
but during my sleep, I dream and realize that I am asleep dreaming. And so I control my dream and integrate your conversations into my dream. So I am semi awake or semi asleep and semi dreaming all together.
Okay,
Wow.
I'm going to play Israel Kama. How do I pronounce his name? Sumatori.
Kamaka. Viva Ole.
Kamaka Viva Ole.
Wow.
Oh, Sumotore. We
Maybe
can't hear it.
guitar looks so, the ukulele looks so small.
I know, right?
Can you hear it now?
Yes.
In a foreign land, national heroes, famous idols in Japan, Akebono, Sashima, and Konishi. Akebono, Sashima, and Konishi. They made history, heard around on the radio. Televisions, magazines, all have conquered. The dream that seemed impossible with dignity. They are Sumotori, Akebono, Sashima, and Konishi. Akebono, Sashima, and Konishi. Well, ladies and gentlemen, say big mahalo to H&L for having us here again. And all of you out there, all you kikis, listen to your mommy and daddy. Mommy and daddy, listen to each other. So, better is, aloha, awiho, malama bono, God bless, malama kapuna, malama rawahan.
This is one looks like he's performing to some children, maybe.
Oh no.
Far away from home, sometimes lonely. Far away from family, all I heard. The dream that seemed impossible with dignity. They are Hawaii, Sumoto,
Goody.
Akebono,
no,
Sashima, and Konishi. And Sabu, Akebono, Sashima, and Konishi. Sashina and Konishi. Again, brothers, Bola Sonia, we found us. Keep it up. More cities, more cities. Boss, please, guys. Arigatou gozaimasu. Stay glorious for us. Aloha, oiho.
Aloha, hoi ho.
Please, Ben.
Awesome. Thank you, Joel.
Thank
Looks like that one was at the, he said thank you to KHNL. KHNL is the TV station, channel 2, I think. I think
That-
he was at the studio.
thank you
Did you
for
know that
introducing that to
listen
me.
to dominating tactics?
Oh, you're
Yes.
welcome. You're really liking that.
Relationship
You
with
found-
your animal.
You found a different video than the one I sent you, so you looked that one up. I've never seen that video that you shared.
Well, I never heard of the fact. Well, I think I may have run into Israel. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it, but I will learn it eventually. But I didn't realize that the Hawaiian Sumotori were so famous or so popular. And I guess among the three of us, am I the only one who's actually been to a sumo wrestling match?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I'm jealous.
Well, it's really interesting to behold. I'll tell you, I was kind of sick the first time I went many years ago. I had a sinus infection or something, but I was in Japan and wanted to see it, and my traveling companion dragged me out, and I'm glad she did, because 40 years later it piqued my interest, and I had the opportunity to go back, but I had to travel to the other end of Japan to see it, and I did that, and it was quite a little adventure, and I'm happy to have experienced it, and then learning about the ukulele player Israel K, and the whole culture behind it, and watching it, because I really see a two-player Vinci game very much like a sumo wrestling match for your mind. So it's not physical, but it's mental. And I see very strong parallels somehow. Probably no one else would agree with me if they understood either sumo or Vinci better, but I see the parallels very clearly somehow in my own bizarre little way.
Interesting. I can't wait. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna write to Creation and tell her that I found a competitor for her, and I'll mail her the board, and I'll copy her in with your email. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, then the three of us can see, and it will be the first, I was kind of anticipating Danny might not retain his interest to the end of a game, because it does take a bit of patience and thoughtfulness, and sometimes people need more immediate feedback in order to keep their interest going. But some people can be more patient and, reflect among themselves and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna wish.
Are you leaving us now?
I'm going to leave
Having
you
an
now.
appointment with another meetup?
I do, but that's not for a little while. I just want to get myself a coffee and get on my email and write to Creation. Her address is at Gmail. I think she does
Okay.
hairdressing, so you'll see it in her email. And
Okay.
yeah, I'm really anxious to see how this works, to see whether excuse me,
Mhm. Bless you.
people have the patience, especially when they've never seen the game played before. Maybe it'd be easier if we played it on Zoom and then played a longer game via email. But
Yeah.
that might be better. I'll see if I can arrange something like that if this doesn't work, and
Okay.
we'll see what we do. But it'll be interesting. Okay.
All
Ciao.
right.
Mahalo.
Mahalo nui loa.
How do I say that? Mahalo nui nua.
Nui loa. Loa. Thanks a lot.
Mahawi nui loa.
Mahalo nui loa.
Mahalo nui loa.
Excellent. Ahoy ho, brother.
Maybe I should go to Hawaii this winter if I can. Do
Yeah.
you know anybody who's got a room to rent in Hawaii somewhere?
I could look it up, but nowadays with Airbnb, you have lots of options.
Yeah.
I could look it up, but my dad is there, and the other side of my family is there, so I could look it up and see.
Yeah, if anybody could stand an old couple hanging around for part of the winter, I'd love that.
Oh, wow. All right, so I'll see what I can find for you, Joel. No worries.
Okay, bye guys.
All right, bye, guys. Bye, Haro. Have a good
Bye,
weekend.
Joel. And are you leaving too? Oh shit, she left. Well, that's good. I am pretty sleepy, and so I'm gonna take a nice nap and see if I can recuperate. I just need to wake up. Thank you, Dominic, for watching and listening to this wonderful conversation. No, who else could be listening? Maybe I'll come back and listen to this one. Oh, Rami might be listening too. Thank you, Rami, for covering a fascinating topic on what we might implement to protect us from financial downfall. Hmm. Not personal financial downfall, but national financial downfall, global financial downfalls, crisis, hyperinflation. I hope we could handle it. I still don't know how we could